The mockery of the unknown. The Stellar Heritage Museum floated gracefully in the neutral zone between three major galactic empires. Its crystalline structure caught starlight from distant suns, refracting it into rainbow patterns that danced across its transparent walls. Inside, the greatest archaeological discoveries from across the known universe were displayed for all civilized species to admire. Today, however, the museum hosted a special gathering that would shake the foundations of galactic understanding. High Marshal Zephyros of the Eternal Dominion stood before the newest exhibit, his forearms crossed in a gesture of supreme disapproval. His species, the Zalathi, had ruled their corner of space for 12,000 years. Their ships were works of art, flowing like liquid silver through the void, powered by captured stellar cores. He gazed at the recovered vessel, with what could only be described as disgust rippling across his bioluminescent skin. The ship before him was an insult to everything he knew about spacecraft design. Where proper vessels curved and spiraled in harmony with the laws of physics, this monstrosity was all sharp angles and flat surfaces. Its hull was a patchwork of different metal plates, some darker than others, as if repairs had been made with whatever materials were available. The entire structure measured roughly 300 meters from bow to stern, tiny by galactic standards, and looked as if someone had assembled it from spare parts in a scrapyard. Supreme Navigator Lysandra of the Gossamer Fleet drifted closer, her ethereal form barely visible except for the constellation of lights that marked her consciousness. Her people had achieved spaceflight before most species discovered fire, and their vessels were grown rather than built, living organisms that swam through space like great whales through ancient oceans. She examined the Ram, a crude vessel with senses that could detect subatomic particles, and her assessment was no kinder than Zephyros's. "This is what passes for archaeological significance these days?" she asked, her voice resonating directly in the minds of those present. "I've seen asteroid mining drones with more sophisticated construction. Look at those welds. They actually fused metal together with heat. How wonderfully primitive." The third member of their impromptu tribunal of judgment was War Master Krang of the Iron Hegemony. Unlike his companions, Krang's species had taken a different evolutionary path, merging with their technology until they became living machines. His crimson optical sensors scanned the vessel with military precision, cataloging weapon ports, armor thickness, and tactical capabilities. His analysis took less than 3 seconds. "Pathetic," he announced, his voice grinding like metal on metal. "The weapons are projectile-based. They actually expected to fight by throwing pieces of metal at their enemies. The armor is simple steel alloys with ceramic composites. A single pulse from my smallest patrol craft would vaporize this embarrassment." The museum's chief curator, a small creature named Pip from the scholarly world of Athenos, nervously fluttered nearby. His species had devoted themselves to the preservation of knowledge after nearly destroying themselves in ancient wars. His 6 eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of his anxiety at hosting such powerful beings. "Honored guests," Pip began, his translator working overtime to convey the proper level of respect. "This vessel was discovered drifting in the dead sectors, regions of space where no life has existed for millions of years. Our dating techniques place it at approximately 800 standard years old, though the technology appears much older." Zephyros waved dismissively, his bioluminescent patterns flashing contempt. 800 years? That's nothing. My family's pleasure yacht is older than that, and it doesn't look like it was assembled by younglings playing with welding torches. The gathered crowd of lesser species representatives and museum patrons had grown as word spread that the 3 military leaders were examining the new exhibit. Whispers in a dozen languages created a constant background hum. Most agreed with the assessment of their betters. The ship was clearly the product of a failed civilization, one that had never progressed beyond the most basic understanding of space travel. Lysandra circled the display, her form passing through the security barriers without triggering them. "The design philosophy is completely wrong," she observed. "Look at the engine configuration. 4 separate thrust units? Why not one elegant propulsion system? It's wasteful and inefficient. And these?" She indicated what appeared to be maneuvering thrusters scattered across the hull. "They put tiny engines everywhere. It's like they expected to need to dodge in every direction." "A product of fear," Krang concluded. "Whatever built this thing was terrified of space. Look at the hull thickness. It's absurdly overbuilt. My analysis shows armor plating 3 times thicker than necessary for micrometeorite protection. They were so frightened of the void that they wrapped themselves in metal cocoons." Pip accessed his data tablet, pulling up the preliminary analysis reports. "The interior shows some interesting features," he offered hesitantly. "There are multiple redundant life support systems, backup power generators, and the computer core appears to be distributed throughout the ship, rather than centralized." "More evidence of primitive paranoia," Zephyros declared. "Advanced civilizations learn to build systems that don't fail. Only savages need backups for their backups. It's a sign of inferior engineering." The ship's bridge section was visible through a hole torn in the hull, probably from whatever catastrophe had ended its journey. The control stations were clearly designed for beings that sat in chairs, with manual controls and physical switches. No neural interfaces, no holographic displays, no quantum entanglement communications. Everything was mechanical and manual. "They actually flew this thing by pushing buttons," Lysandra noted with amusement. "How quaint. My people abandoned physical controls before we left our homeworld's atmosphere. This is like seeing someone trying to pilot a starship with levers and pulleys." War Master Krang's scanners had detected something else. "The crew quarters are revealing," he said. "Small spaces, barely large enough for a single being to stand upright. Minimal comfort features. Whoever built this expected their crew to suffer. It's either a prison ship or the product of a particularly cruel species." The discussion continued for another hour, each leader finding new aspects of the ship to mock. The construction was crude, the technology primitive, the design philosophy backward. By the time they prepared to leave for other exhibits, they had thoroughly catalogued the vessel as an example of everything wrong with primitive species attempting spaceflight. "Mark my words," High Marshal Zephyros announced to the gathered crowd. "Whatever species built this abomination, they're long extinct. No civilization that produces such crude technology could survive contact with the true powers of the galaxy. They probably destroyed themselves in some pointless conflict, or were absorbed by their betters." "I agree," Lysandra added. "This ship is a monument to failure, a reminder of what happens when species reach for the stars before they're ready. They should have stayed on their little world, wherever it was, and evolved for a few more million years before attempting spaceflight." War Master Krang made a sound that might have been laughter. "If they hadn't died out on their own, first, contact with any real military force would have ended them. This ship wouldn't last 30 seconds in actual combat. It's a miracle it survived long enough to become a museum piece." As the 3 leaders moved on to examine artifacts from successful civilizations, Pip remained behind with his team. He stared at the ugly, angular ship with its crude welds and primitive technology. Something about it bothered him, something beyond its obvious inferiority. There was a logic to its construction that he couldn't quite grasp, a purpose to its seeming madness. His assistant, a young scholar named Vera, approached with a concerned expression. "Sir, the decryption team has made some progress on the ship's computer systems. They've managed to access what appears to be a partial crew manifest." Pip took the offered tablet and studied the data. The language was unlike anything in their databases, though the universal translator was making progress. The script was simple, almost primitive in its directness. No flowing artistic characters or complex ideograms, just simple symbols arranged in linear patterns. "Keep working on it," Pip instructed. "I want to know everything about who built the ship and why. Something tells me there's more to this vessel than our esteemed guests believe." As the museum lights dimmed for the evening cycle, Pip stood alone before the battered ship. Its scarred hull told a story of survival against odds that would have destroyed the elegant vessels of the Eternal Dominion or the living ships of the Gossamer fleet. Every weld, every patched hole, every reinforced section spoke of determination to keep flying no matter what the universe threw at them. Tomorrow, the real investigation would begin, and Pip had a feeling that what they discovered would challenge everything the galaxy thought it knew about primitive species and their crude technology. The revelation of human ingenuity. The decryption laboratory hummed with activity as quantum processors worked through the night to crack the alien vessel's computer systems. Pip had assembled at his best team, pulling experts from across the museum's vast staff. They had been working for 3 days straight, and the breakthrough came just as the morning lights began to brighten the station's corridors. "Director Pip," Vera's excited voice cut through the concentrated silence. "We've done it. We've accessed the main database." Pip rushed to her workstation, his 6 eyes focusing on the streams of data flowing across her screens. The universal translator was working overtime, converting the alien language into something comprehensible. What he saw made his heart skip several beats. The first thing that appeared was a designation: USS Relentless, Earth Coalition Navy. The words meant nothing to him, but the military classification was clear. This wasn't a cargo hauler or exploration vessel. This was a warship. "Earth?" Pip muttered, searching his vast mental database. "I've never heard of such a world. Vera, check the stellar cartography records." While she worked, Pip continued reading. The ship's logs were extensive, detailing a service history that spanned 43 years. 43 years of continuous operation in what appeared to be constant combat conditions. The maintenance logs alone were staggering. The ship had been rebuilt from near destruction 17 times. "Sir," Vera interrupted, her voice shaking, "Earth is located in the dead sectors, specifically in the region we call the Forbidden Reach. But according to these star charts, when this ship was active, that entire region was very much alive." Pip felt a chill run through his body. The Forbidden Reach had been dead for 500 years, ever since the Great Scorching, when 2 ancient empires had annihilated each other in a war that turned a dozen star systems into radioactive graveyards. If Earth was there, then these beings, these humans as the logs called them, had been at the center of that catastrophe. The crew manifest revealed more surprises. The ship had been designed for a crew of 200, but the logs showed it had operated with as few as 12 during critical missions. The human physiology data was fascinating. They were bipedal, relatively small compared to most galactic species, with no natural armor, weapons, or energy manipulation abilities. They seemed almost defenseless. But the combat logs told a different story. Pip pulled up the first battle record, dated some 800 years ago. The Relentless had engaged 3 vessels from something called the Hegemony Vanguard. The enemy ships were each 4 times the Relentless's size, with energy weapons that should have vaporized the human vessel in seconds. Instead, the battle had lasted 6 hours. The human captain, someone named Sarah Chen, had used tactics that seemed insane. Instead of maintaining distance and exchanging fire like civilized species did, she had driven her ship directly at the enemy formation. The crude projectile weapons that Krang had mocked had torn through the enemy shields like they didn't exist. The thick armor that seemed like paranoid overbuilding had absorbed direct hits that would have crippled any modern vessel. "They fought like madmen," Vera whispered, reading over Pip's shoulder. "Look at this. They deliberately rammed one of the enemy ships when their weapons were depleted." The logs continued, battle after battle, each more impossible than the last. The Relentless had fought enemies with technology centuries ahead of Earth's. Energy beings that could phase through normal matter, living ships that could regenerate damage, artificial intelligences that could hack any computer system. And somehow, against all logic and reason, the crude human ship had survived them all. But it was the philosophy behind the ship's construction that truly stunned Pip. He found a Technica manual that explained human engineering principles, and it was a revelation. Every crude weld, every redundant system, every thick armor plate had a purpose. Humans didn't build their ships to be perfect. They built them to be fixable, in battle, under fire, with whatever materials were available. The multiple life support systems weren't paranoia, they were practicality. When one section of the ship was destroyed, the crew could seal it off and keep fighting. The distributed computer core meant that no single hit could cripple the ship's operations. The manual controls that seemed so primitive meant that even if all power was lost, even if the computers were destroyed, the crew could still fly the ship. "Director," called Tam, one of the xenobiology specialists. "You need to see this. I've been analyzing the crew records, trying to understand human psychology." Pip moved to Tam's station, where psychological profiles and medical data streamed across multiple screens. What he saw defied everything he knew about intelligent species. Humans didn't just accept danger. They thrived on it. Their bodies produced chemicals that enhanced their performance under stress. The more desperate the situation, the more creative and determined they became. They had a concept called adrenaline that turned fear into fuel, panic into power. The medical logs showed injuries that should have been fatal to any rational species. Humans with missing limbs continuing to fight. Crew members exposed to hard vacuum for minutes who recovered and returned to duty. They had redundant organs, backup biological systems, and a healing factor that, while slow, was relentless. "They're built like their ships," Tam said in awe. "Redundant, adaptable, and incredibly hard to kill." But the true revelation came when Pip accessed the captain's personal logs. Sarah Chen had recorded her thoughts throughout the ship's service, and her words painted a picture of a species unlike any in the known galaxy. Humans knew they were outmatched. They knew their technology was inferior, their ships crude, their weapons primitive, and they didn't care. They had a saying: "If you find yourself in a fair fight, your tactics suck." They studied their enemies, learned their weaknesses, and exploited them ruthlessly. Energy shields designed to stop plasma? Humans used kinetic projectiles. Sophisticated targeting computers? Humans used unpredictable manual flying. Advanced materials that were light and strong? Humans used crude iron that could be patched with scrap metal and determination. The final log entry was dated just before the ship was abandoned. The Great Scorching was beginning, the result of an escalating conflict between two ancient empires that had tried to conquer Earth. The humans had played both sides against each other, using guerrilla tactics, false intelligence, and sheer stubborn refusal to surrender. When the empires finally turned their doomsday weapons on each other in frustration, the humans evacuated. But not in defeat. The last entry from Captain Chen read, "They thought they could break us by destroying our worlds. They don't understand. Home isn't a place for humans. It's the people beside you and the stars ahead. We'll find new worlds, build new ships, and if anyone tries to stop us, we'll teach them the same lesson. Humans don't conquer. We survive, and then we thrive." Pip stood in stunned silence as the implications sank in. The dead sectors weren't dead because of the war between the two empires. They were dead because those empires had tried to conquer humanity. And somewhere out there, beyond the known galaxy, humans were still flying their crude ships, still building with their primitive technology, still refusing to accept that they were inferior. He thought about High Marshal Zephyros with his flowing ships and captured stars. He thought about Lysandra with her living vessels and evolved consciousness. He thought about Warmaster Krang with his merged biology and technology. They all believed in perfection, in superiority, in the right way to build and fight and live. Humans believed in something else entirely. They believed in getting the job done, no matter how ugly it looked. Pip made a decision. He sealed the decryption laboratory and classified all their findings at the highest level. The galaxy wasn't ready for this knowledge. The three military leaders who had mocked the relentless commanded fleets of thousands of ships, controlled vast empires, wielded technologies that could reshape reality itself. But if they ever encountered humans, with their crude ships and primitive weapons, and refusal to accept defeat, Pip suspected the galaxy would learn a new definition of power. Not the power of perfection, but the power of persistence. Not the strength of superiority, but the strength of survival. As he stood before the battered hull of the Relentless one more time, Pip no longer saw crude construction and primitive technology. He saw a philosophy made manifest in metal and determination. Every weld that Zephyros had mocked was a testament to human adaptability. Every redundant system that Lysandra had dismissed was a monument to human pragmatism. Every thick armor plate that Krang had ridiculed was a declaration of human stubbornness.